Okay, good evening everybody. Can we commence the meeting? And we'll commence as usual with apologies for absence.
Chairman, Councillor Richard Lewis is running slightly late.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest in matters arising? Yes, Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Chairman. I declare a non-pecuniary but personal interest in respect of item 6 and recommendation 8 in particular on that item.
Thank you. The next agenda item is to approve the minutes of the last Cabinet meeting on pages 1 to 12. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
And then to confirm that items of business marked Part 1 will be considered in public, and they are items 5 to 11, and items of business marked Part 2 will be held in private, and they are Cabinet reports 12 to 14. So on to the first public report tonight. That's agenda item 5. This was deferred from the last Cabinet meeting. ResPOC review into Shisha Bars, lounges and cafes. Could I call on Councillor Michael White to present this report, please?
Good evening. I'd like to offer this review on behalf of the residents and environmental services on Shisha Bars, lounges and cafes. Although Hillingdon does not have a Shisha Bar culture at present, it's noted that the smoking of Shisha Bar, particularly by the young people, is generally on the rise, and members felt there was a valid public health concern to merit a preventative approach on how council and partners could potentially respond to this. The object of this review is to look closely at the regulatory factors and public health implications of shisha smoking. The committee's aim was to seek an integrated one council strategy to deal with the health and amenity impacts that can sometimes be caused by unregulated shisha smoking. The findings from the committee will help better identify shisha bars and work with shisha premises in a constructive way, helping to reduce the community impact and promote greater awareness of the health risk associated with shisha smoking. I appreciate there's quite a number of recommendations from the committee and the cabinet members may wish to review the implementations of these further. I'd like to thank officers for their support during the review and the witnesses from across the various council services who helped the committee shape this review. So, on behalf of the committee, I present the report.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor White, for presenting that to us. I welcome the report from ResPOC following the review that we've heard about. The committee's findings, I think, have come from a thorough review of such establishments in the borough, how well they are managed, and what public health role the local authority can play in that regard. Now, there is a second recommendation which is revised, seeking Cabinet approval to delegate authority to yourself, Leader, and myself to provide a detailed response on the recommendations and, of course, to take forward those recommendations which are proportionate and complement the Council's wider public health and regulatory activity, subject, of course, to business priorities and requirements. And in moving the recommendations, I would also like to ask the Chairman to take back our thanks to his members. And I so move. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have recommendation 1 and amended recommendation 2. Are they agreed? Thank you, Councillor White. Agenda item 6, page 51, the Council Budget 17-18 Month 7 Revenue and Capital Monitoring Report. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. Well, this is, as you rightly said, Month 7's snapshot of where we stand, Month 7 being October. And you'll see that the net underspend now stands at virtually £1 million, and that is an improvement of 81,000 on the previous month. Now, there are 9 recommendations on the bottom of pages 51, on the top of pages 52, and there is a further 10th recommendation on the addendum sheet. Subject to an amendment I'm about to mention, I will propose all of those as a way of moving forward. And the amendment I would like to draw people's attention to is on recommendation 8. We are and always have been generously keen to help the uniformed youth groups in our borough. However, our generosity doesn't quite stretch as far as is suggested on item 8. The figure in question should be 20,000, not 20 million. It's a minor change, I accept, and Councillor Mills's wife is most disappointed by this change, but I'm sure she'll get over it in time. Anyway, it's the usual budget monitoring position. It's a good news story. Our General Fund is in a good position. Most of the savings needed now are there. There's only small amount that is still amber, and we're fairly comfortable that within the next short while we will translate those to the colour green. And that is probably worth where we go. I dare say you'll have a few words to say, Leader, but I suppose that the main act is to follow shortly, and therefore probably not too much more needs to be said. I move those 10 recommendations, including the amendment to recommendation 8.
Thank you, Councillor Bianco. On the recommendations, note 1 is just to note the forecast. Note 2 is the Treasury Management updates at Appendix E, which is page 90. As usual, we have 96.6 million on deposits. We don't get an awful lot on that. It's 0.42%. It was 0.44 last month, so that's not very good. 63 million outstanding debt on General Fund attracts interest at 3.38%. Gilts ended the month around the same levels as they started, therefore premiums remain too high to make early repayment of debt feasible. There were no breaches of the prudential indicators or non-compliance with Treasury management policy and practices during this month. Recommendation 3, the continuation of the delegation of authority to myself and the Chief Executive regarding agency and consultancy assignments. They're detailed on page 91 and I think the following 2 pages. Recommendations 4 and 5 are to approve rephasing of HRA capital programme budgets and capital expenditure financing in the General Fund into later years. This is part of the management of the budget setting for next year, which we'll come on to shortly. We set a 1-year revenue budget, but we set effectively a 5-year capital budget, and that's moving all the time. This capital expenditure will be phased into the next year, and it's prudent to do it now. 6, improvement of requirements from general contingency in the current year for the Battle of Britain Heritage Project. That's the Visitors Centre there at 449k, and 151k for projects at Uxbridge Mortuary and Whiteheath Farm. The receipt of gift funding for planning performance agreements relating to Malthouse 281 Field End Road, Eastcote of £15,000. And as Councillor Bianco said, the approval of a grant of £20,000 to the Willow Tree Guide Centre to enable refurbishment of the kitchen and disabled bathroom. The delegation of authority to myself, Councillor Bianco, and the Deputy Chief Executive, to progress the relocation of Hillingdon Outdoor Activity Centre, which we've got to do at a fair pace, so we need to have the authority to do whatever's necessary, making financial decisions and reporting back as required. The new recommendation 10, this, and it's 6 months to the day the Grenfell Tower fire occurred. The Cabinet and councillors here will know that shortly after that we decided we would expedite all work relating to fire doors and fire alarms, etc., which we were doing on a rolling programme, and do it with all due haste, and this is part of that. We are varying current contracts that we had in place for the provision of fire doors to use those contracts to do it in other properties and get it done faster. And that's basically what recommendation 10 is saying. I think we are in a very sound position that the balance is projected at the year end of nearly £40 million to carry forward into the next year's budget setting. Is a very solid position, and with that I think Councillor Bianco has formally moved those recommendations with 8 as amended. Does anybody else want to comment, or can we take that as agreed? Agreed. Thank you, everybody. We now move on to Agenda B, which is the budget for next year, for 2018-19, and the medium-term financial forecast for the following 4 years. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. Well, this is the first outing for the budget from April 2018. And as anyone can see, we're still some 3-4 months away from that event, or that date. However, the nature of local government is such that we need to get this out now to allow for consultations from various bodies and parts of the council, and that's why we see it now in December. There are still issues outstanding, so I think the only thing we can be 100% certain on is that this will not be the final version. It is, however, a reflection of what we do intend to achieve and what we are aiming to deliver for our residents in the forthcoming year. And I know you, Leader, are going to talk at some length on it, whereas I will reserve the majority of my speech for that marvellous occasion in February when you all have the benefit of hearing it in great length and with no doubt with great interest. However, before I go, I think it, and I'm sure you'll mention this, and I don't think it can be mentioned too many times, this is going to be the 10th year with no increase for all our residents, and the 12th year for no increase if you're 65, or if you're over 65. And that does, of course, mean that if you were 65 10 years ago, you're now 77, and you haven't had an increase in your rates, in your council tax in that period, and that is some achievement. I think there are very few, if any, councils out there that have been able to deliver anything like that whilst maintaining the services and improving the services that we have done. And I think that's something we need to, and I'm sure we will be, making much of over the forthcoming months. There are 4 recommendations on page, 5 recommendations even on page 2, which I will move, and I know the Leader will talk to quite a number of them. I think the only other thing I'd like to add is that our thanks is, and that's my thanks, to both the Leader and the Director of Finance and his team for all the work they've done to get us here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bianco. As you say, 5 recommendations. We're approving the draft General Fund and Housing Revenue Account budgets. We're sending these off for individual comments by policy overview committees, and it's obviously going out to consultation on a more general field as well. We also approved the proposed amendments to fees and charges, which are included here, and there'll be a full detailed fees and charges report in February when we take this to council. Authorisation to the Director of Finance and myself to respond on behalf of the Council to the consultation on the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement and the Mayor of London's budget consultation. It's always an anomaly, as far as I'm concerned, that we have to set our first version of the budget before we know what the finance settlement is from government, but that's the way it works. I don't anticipate too many major changes between now and February, but as Councillor Bianco says, there will be some undoubtedly. And the final recommendation is regarding the public consultation, following that completion of that, to recommend to Council for approval in January, February, the Council Tax Reduction Scheme. And that is shown in this report on page 65 or thereabouts. Right, this budget, as I've said, contains the detail of the Council's 18-19 revenue budget and our financial forecast for 4 years. We will have time in February to go into the detail of how the budget for this General Fund and Housing Revenue Account is constructed, but tonight I will go through the General Fund budget headlines. As Councillor Bianco mentioned, for the 10th successive year, council tax for all residents will be frozen. This will be the 12th year of the council tax freeze for the over 65s. For the 3rd successive year, we will not levy the social care precept, which is a mechanism to have an additional 2% in the first year and up to 3% last year and next year, in effect giving councils the opportunity to raise a total council tax receipt and precept of 4.99%, and many councils will be doing that. Some will raise just a precept and claim to have frozen their council tax. It's just council tax with another name. As regards fees and charges for council services and facilities, these will be shown in detail in February, but will remain at least 10% cheaper than the charges levied by our neighbouring councils. All current services and facilities, including our comprehensive library service, weekly refuse collections, the Chrysalis programme, and the raft of services for elderly, including free burglar alarms, free allotments and free swimming, will continue. In addition to which, we will provide a waste and recycling centre in the south of the borough, a new state-of-the-art swimming pool and leisure centre in the Useley West Drayton area. We've offered to purchase Uxbridge Police Station and lease it to Mopac for a 5-year period at a very modest rent, on top of which we've offered to pay £250,000, half the estimated running cost each year for the next 5 years, and we are awaiting a response to that offer. We will offer a free bulky waste collection service currently available to the over 65s for all residents. We will expand our youth offer with a grants programme of £200k a year to support independent youth groups. It has become apparent that the old-style youth clubs that we've been building are no longer favoured by our young people as they once were. So whilst we continue to operate these, we will now stop building youth centres and provide capital funding to support guides, scouts, cadets and sports clubs and other clubs for young people that are thriving. The proposed youth centre at Harefield will now be used, that site will be used as a children's playground, and that will be built early in the new year. And Harefield will also receive funding for the accommodation of at least one of its uniform groups, new accommodation. We will set aside £200,000 for the continued fight against Heathrow expansion. And for the benefit of the GMB union, who don't like it, this is in addition to the 300k that we've already got put aside for this purpose. The first of our rebuilt libraries is now 10 years old. So we will commence a refurbishment programme, £1 million a year, to maintain these valued community resource bases at a good level. Our leisure facilities are also in need of some refurbishment and will benefit from a 750k a year refurbishment programme. Using HS2 funding, we will re-provide the Hillingdon Outdoor Activity Centre. We will continue to rebuild or refurbish bowls clubs in the borough, investing 500k in each of the next 2 years as required. Our playground replacement programme will continue, as will our investment in highways and pavements and our school expansion programme. All in all, very much business as usual in Hillingdon. Sound financial management and good business practice, allowing the combination of a continued tax freeze and the continued delivery and improvement to services and facilities. A 10-year tax freeze. 10 out of 10 for Hillingdon Conservative Council. You'll hear a lot of that in the coming months. And with that, and mindful of the fact that we will get unlimited time to speak in detail in February, does any other Cabinet member wish to speak at this time? Councillor Mills.
Yeah, I just want to, obviously I think the budget is an excellent budget for Hillingdon again, and I think that the 10 out of 10 is an incredible achievement. If people 10 years ago had said we would still be freezing council tax, not imposing any surcharges and keeping the services up, they would have been very surprised. So I think it's very much about what we stand for. But I just wanted to touch upon the police situation, because today is the day in which the front counter at Uxbridge has been officially closed. There is now a sign up there saying that you have to go to Hayes, but we also know that the police will still be occupying that building for another 2 or 3 years, which I think is the first sign that Mayor Khan and Mopac have just been lying to the public. This isn't about trying to save money. This is a deliberate policy decision, and then trying to blame the government, saying money is the issue. Because the amount of saving by closing the front counter but keeping the building operational for another 2 or 3 years is minimal on minimal. Our very generous offer of both to purchase and to lease back and to guarantee them half the running costs for 5 years is quite honestly a real challenge for them, because if they don't accept it, it just reinforces again this was never about the money, it was just being spiteful. And the residents of Hillingdon and the residents of Uxbridge, I think, need to understand that, and I'm sure more and more of them are understanding that as time goes on, that Mayor Khan and Mopac are letting them down badly. The good news is Conservative Hillingdon doesn't let them down. We stand with them and will continue to stand with them against this absurd decision.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons?
Well, thank you, Leader. I think it's important to make a brief reference to something which doesn't directly form part of these budget papers, but which will be debated extensively when we set the council tax. I'm looking forward to celebrating my birthday once again by coming to a council meeting and having the opportunity to say 10 years of no tax rise. That is a birthday present I suppose I can look forward to. But on the point about the schools budget, schools in Hillingdon will be, as a consequence of the shift in the national funding formula, seeing a small increase in budgets, which I think has got to be seen as a positive thing in a context where a number of London boroughs expect to lose out significantly. But so far, Schools Forum, which is the body responsible for setting the schools budget, has struggled to get to grips with the challenges, both that schools budgets overall and also the technical implications of the funding formula changes will have for the way that that money is distributed. And I know they met last night, and the Corporate Director of Finance has briefed the Leader and I essentially that they have been unable to come forward with a decision which allows them to deal with the underlying deficit, which the decisions they've previously taken have left on the schools budget. Now, in the past, clearly, as a Cabinet, we've had to consider proposals at this meeting which come forward about that schools budget. There are a number of things, including things like the early years fees and charges, which are outlined in the paper which we are taking tonight, which could be impacted as a consequence of the failure of the Schools Forum to get to grips with that. So I think we will be asking them to go back and redo their homework on it, and certainly have been engaging very much with schools on the way forward on that. But I think it's just important that Cabinet members know that whilst this part of the budget, which is very much under the control of the Council, is in fairly good shape, another part which may have an impact is not going so well. And that can certainly be set in the context of the capital budget tonight, which shows, once again, very substantial investment in ensuring that every Hillingdon child has access to a good quality school place, including in particular those children, a growing number in the borough who have special educational needs, for whom this paper outlines significant investment in facilities to make sure that that population does not have to, as they might have in the past, travel elsewhere, either in London or outside of the borough, in Buckinghamshire, Hertfordshire, to find the kind of education that they need, but they will be able to get it much closer to home. Clearly that's positive for them, it's positive for their families, and it is continued evidence of putting our younger residents first.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Recommendations 1 to 5, are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 8, grants to Hillingdon's local voluntary organisations, 18-19 financial year. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Leader. I move the recommendations at the top of page 96, and in doing so, this is another report that sets out Hillingdon as being different from many other London boroughs, because we continue to support a wide range of organisations, and from the voluntary sector, as set out in the report and detailed specifically in the Appendix A on page 106 to 107, with grants to enable them to carry on doing their important work. And we have been consistent over the years in this support, and intend once again to be consistent to allow them to have the confidence to be able to go on and build and extend the services which they are providing to a wide range of our residents. And in some cases we've even had the ability this year to raise the amount of grant to recognise the increased demands that some of these organisations are facing. We also have added a new organisation to the grant list, one which has made a very strong case, and one which is very close to our manifesto commitments about protecting our natural environment. So the Green Corridor organisation are getting a £10,000 grant to assist them to ensure that we maintain, as we know, the vast swathes of green spaces that we have throughout this borough, to the standard which our residents deserve and have become accustomed to. I just particularly want to draw members' attention to a rearrangement of the deal we've done with Age UK. In the past, Age UK have had a direct grant from us, and then we've also entered into a number of specific contracts for specified services, and they have been managed elsewhere as part of our need to reflect how best to manage these things going forward, and the part of the organisation's continued need for internal efficiency improvements. The discussions with Age UK have led to all this now coming under the core grant budget, and that's why you'll see below the total of 1671 on page 107 an additional entry for Age UK of 312,400, which is the value of the contracts that we pay for them to perform on our behalf. So for Age UK in total, £582,000 of our money is given to them to perform, as I said, either specific contracts or in order for them to continue to support a sector of our population, which, as I think everyone knows, we value highly and recognise that if we can do as much to support them there are great benefits to avoid them needing to fall back on services elsewhere or relying more and more on the health service to support them. So that we see this as all being very forward-thinking and sensible investment for the long term. I've moved the recommendations, and am pleased that we are able to continue to be an authority that is seen to be giving just under, in total, £2 million towards the voluntary sector in this borough.
Thank you. Are the recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 9 is on the Cabinet Agenda C. In terms of that, it's Heathrow expansion and responses and submissions to the Government's consultation and Parliamentary Committee's calls for evidence. The recommendations are shown on page 2, but before I move these, could I, on behalf of the Cabinet, say thank you to the Borough Solicitor and the Council officers who are working on the continued threats to the well-being of the people and our environment in this borough. A lot of work has been done over a considerable time, and we remain in a strong position to defeat this proposal, probably stronger than we were last time we did it. The recommendations are, and these are mainly, or almost entirely as far as the submissions are concerned, based around what we have done and what the boroughs of Richmond, Wandsworth and the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead have done. We are operating as a four-borough outfit on this, because we have agreement in almost every aspect. The first recommendation is to note the contents of the report, then to approve the joint response that is to be submitted. This is the major one tonight by the London boroughs, as I've mentioned, to the consultation on the revised draft National Policy Statement as set out in Appendix 1. This gets awfully complicated. The government have got this in a bigger mess than Brexit at the moment, which is not a bad thing from our point of view. But the rest are endorsing submissions that we have made, reaffirming the Council's commitment, either working alone or in conjunction with partner authorities, to take all necessary action to oppose the Government's proposals, and confirming the existing delegations to the Deputy Chief Executive, the Borough Solicitor and myself to formally implement any actions that we need to do, legal actions or whatever, in due course. And finally, to request that the Chairman of Executive Scrutiny waives the scrutiny call-in. We have to get this into the Department of Transport before the 19th of December, so we need to do that. Now, the salient points of what we are submitting are shown on page 7, and it is worth looking at those. They are, given that the passenger demand forecast and air quality issues common to the four boroughs, it's been decided to submit a joint response on this occasion. So we're not going to submit a separate one. There didn't seem to be much point in doing that. It wouldn't add anything. The overriding concern appears to be that the Government remains in favour of a third runway at Heathrow, but the evidence is even weaker and the rationale is now different. This is consistent with the fear that the Government has already made up its mind that there should be a third runway at Heathrow, come what may, and regardless of the facts and consequences. The key issues set out in the response are Heathrow expansion delivers fewer economic benefits than the Gatwick expansion. All four boroughs agree. Heathrow expansion cannot be delivered without unacceptable air pollution and noise. Although the government's rationale now depends on Heathrow's ability to operate as a hub airport, the facts are that it would at most deliver benefits of an airport hub model for only 2 years after expansion. Within 2 years, Heathrow will again be at capacity. If this is so, then the evidence suggests that once at capacity, Heathrow will essentially become a point-to-point airport and not a hub. Airlines will prioritise more profitable routes and passengers' fares will increase. Heathrow expansion will deliver fewer domestic connections than Gatwick. Heathrow expansion has the highest environmental disbenefits. There are no proven costed mitigation plans to address the environmental harm. Heathrow expansion will not meet air quality requirements, but an expanded Gatwick can. The new information demonstrates that Heathrow expansion cannot be delivered under the Government's and Airport Commission's claims that there will be less noise with expansion in 2003 than there is today. No consideration has been given to deliverability in terms of timescales and appropriate funding for surface access infrastructure, including the new revised opening year, 2026, or at capacity in 2028. The MPS and subsequent DCO process will only be informed by indicative flight paths. The Government plans that communities will not know when and for how long and how much noise they will experience until after the decision to approve the third runway has been set in stone. I wonder why. This approach is both unfair and unlawful. It amounts to an attempt to avoid legitimate opposition in placing a huge airport in the most densely populated area of the UK until it is too late. Gatwick expansion can be delivered with greater benefits, is cheaper, and unlike Heathrow, it will require no taxpayer funding, and it would deliver greater domestic connectivity and with far reduced environmental harm. It is welcome that the revised draft MPS now includes more information about noise from the survey of noise attitudes. That information now shows that the noise impact of an expanded Heathrow is more than 50% rise in those affected compared to today. This is in contrast to the Government's earlier assertion that an expanded Heathrow in 2030 would be quieter than today, and is enough reason on its own for the Government to reject expansion at Heathrow. We note that the evidence in the appraisal of sustainability that the economic benefits of Gatwick and Heathrow are about the same, but the environmental and other detriment of Heathrow is much greater and does not support the conclusion in favour of Heathrow expansion. As a Conservative administration, we voted at Council to favour the Gatwick option over Heathrow. Given that there were only two on the table, that seemed to be the most appropriate, and that has been borne out by the facts that I've just indicated to you. This, as you will recall, was not the position of the Labour group, which was very disappointing at that time, but that will have no effect on how this Council conducts the fight against Heathrow. We will be maintaining that Gatwick is the better option, and we will defend our people and our environment. This is just one further step in quite a long journey. Despite the Government and Heathrow's insinuation that resistance is futile, this is not a done deal. In fact, only today, Client Earth, who in October 2016 managed to get a JR and forced the Government to publish a new air quality plan. The new air quality plan was published by the Government in July of this year. Client Earth brought yet a further judicial review challenge, and the Borough Solicitor informed me just this afternoon that the High Court has ordered that the challenge is expedited. It's heard quickly, and therefore this case will be heard in the High Court before the 23rd of February next year, and it could have a huge outcome on the Government's expansion plans for Heathrow if that air quality plan is kicked into touch again. So, much to fight for. As I said in the budget paper, we have a considerable fighting fund, and we don't take any nonsense at all from Back Heathrow, Stop Northolt, the GMB Union, who tell us that we mustn't spend our money on defending our residents or our environment. That is not Hillingdon Council. That is nonsense that they're putting forward. And we've assured the people of the villages and those in the West Drayton area and all those that will be affected over the rest of Hillingdon, when the as yet undisclosed flight paths will be declared, they've got to come in and out of that airport somewhere, and most of it is going to be over us by the look of it. So, are there any other comments on this? I think it's a fairly open and shut case. If so, are recommendations 1 to 7 agreed? Thank you. Turning to the main agenda. Agenda item 10, Better Care Fund Section 75 Agreement. Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you, Leader. This is, of course, the term for the mandatory process by which ourselves and Hillingdon CCG have, in effect, a pooled budget allocated to a range of work streams with a focus on the over 65s and with the objective of drawing out health and social care and delivering better outcomes for our residents. And, of course, it had a good airing at the Health and Wellbeing Board this week, and it is moving forward positively. This Cabinet report and the recommendation gives legal effect to the Section 75 arrangements which make that possible for the next 2 years, and I so move. Thank you.
Recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 11, Planning Obligations, the Quarterly Financial Monitoring Report. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Leader. It's our usual quarterly monitoring report we get for the 106 and 278 agreements that our planners actually get through the planning committee and also through their delegated authority decisions. As you will see, we still have a lot of developers coming into Hillingdon, wanting to work with us in Hillingdon, and our planning department process these on a very good level, keeping in mind that our residents do come first, so they always get the best out of any development that is going up across the borough. You can see the financial figures within the financial costs of the report here. We currently hold 12.8 million. Of this, 3.6 already allocated or earmarked for projects. And you will see that in quarter 2, the council has received additional income of 1.4 million and spent 131k. I do meet on a regular basis, as I always say, with officers, and we do go through every single bit of this money that we hold, and we do clear it through as quickly as we can, and we do passport it to other areas within the development area if we're not going to use it immediately outside that particular building. I will say to my Cabinet colleagues again, please look at your own areas. If there's anything you think is a bit stuck at the moment, then discuss it with officers and we'll get it through. But as usual, education does hold quite a large amount of the monies, as we would expect anyway. I so move the recommendation.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We now move to part 2,